he has not got his way in the negotiations that he's been having with Canada over a number of things, over some of this on this digital question, but possibly also on some of the other things that he's been asking Canada to do on some of their other trading practices. And so he's, it looks like a bit of a tantrum. And until we hear differently, then the US and Canada will be back in the kind of trade war we thought that they were escaping a few months ago.
So first of all, what's Trump's reasoning that he's given for why he's cut off these trade talks with Canada?
Well, it's kind of hard to understand always with Trump what exactly is his grievance, but this seems to be, look, we've had the negotiations going on between the US and Canada now for several months. We've had the US imposing increased tariff levels on Canada, then backing off them, and then reimposing them, and then backing off them again. He wants a fundamental change in the way Canada does business with the United States, and in particular, he wants clarity on issues over things like there are some specific details such as digital services and things like that. And it looks like the government of Mark Carney has not come up with the concessions that he wanted. So essentially, by saying I've broken off all trade negotiations with them, he's going back to the situation that when he imposed the tariffs, the high tariffs of a few months ago. We're not clear, to be honest with you, Chloe, what exactly will happen, whether this is a kind of yet another threat, something that could change in the next few days. But as it stands, it reflects the fact that he has not got his way in the negotiations that he's been having with Canada over a number of things, over some of this on this digital question, but possibly also on some of the other things that he's been asking Canada to do on some of their other trading practices. And so he's, it looks like a bit of a tantrum. And until we hear differently, then the US and Canada will be back in the kind of trade war we thought that they were escaping a few months ago.
The digital services tax is quite interesting, isn't it? Because obviously it's something which is being examined here in the UK. It seems that Trump really is very against that. And I'm just wondering why, because when you looked at it, Carney and Trump seemed to be having a warmer relationship, didn't they?
They did. You're absolutely right. I mean, all this began, of course, back in January when President Trump took office. And of course, Justin Trudeau was prime minister, who seemed to be the man that perhaps of anyone in the entire world, the man that Donald Trump loved to hate. He liked to tease Trudeau about Canada, he called him Governor Trudeau, you'll recall, the idea that Canada would be the 51st state and Trudeau would be reduced to the status of governor. Then, of course, we had that extraordinary election where the Conservatives that were expected to win that election in Canada, but largely because of the aggressive stance Trump had taken towards them, Mark Carney and the Liberals in Canada were actually able to, Trudeau's successor, were actually able to win again. And yes, despite the fact that Carney and Trudeau from the same party, it did look like he had a much better relationship with Trump. Trump's sort of dropped some of the 51st state stuff. He actually said some positive things about Mark Carney. Now, they had a meeting a couple of months back, which didn't go all that well. It was pretty tense, pretty taut. But yeah, broadly speaking, the relationship did look better. But what's clear is that the underlying, the trade differences that the two sides have, or let's put it this way, the demands that Donald Trump is making of Canada, they haven't changed. And whether or not it's Trudeau or, as it is now, Mark Carney, neither has the position of the Canadian government. And that seems to be where we are.
Let's also talk about the Supreme Court ruling, which has essentially given more strength to Donald Trump, hasn't it, as president, with particularly when we're looking at the idea of the executive orders, these lower courts that can't actually block his executive orders, and particularly the idea of birthright citizenship and the implications for people in the US.
That's right, Chloe. In this case that the court ruled on today, it's a narrow ruling in one sense. They didn't rule on the question of birthright citizenship. This is, as I'm sure your listeners know, but this is President Trump issued an executive order, pretty well on his first or second day in office, essentially rescinding what has been the practice in the United States for 150 years, which is that if you're born in the United States, irrespective of your immigration status, if you're born here, you automatically become a U.S. citizen, even if your parents are here illegally, if they're illegal immigrants. So that's always been the way it has been. Trump rescinded that in his executive order, saying, no, you've got to be, at least one of your parents has got to be a US citizen, or at least here, the mother has to be here legally and on a long term, sort of as essentially a green card holder. That case was that executive order has been ruled unconstitutional by judges, by several judges across various jurisdictions in the United States. What the challenge to those rulings was, the administration took these, appealed those rulings, went to the Supreme Court on the grounds that individual judges in different districts do not have the right to rule something constitutional or unconstitutional for the entire country. They can say, well, insofar as my jurisdiction is concerned, this doesn't apply, but they can't have a court, a single judge in, let's say California, which is particularly liberal, saying this is going to President Trump's doing something illegal, and this is now going to be, my ruling is going to apply across the land. The Supreme Court sided with the administration on that and said, yes, that is correct. By a 6-3 majority, the conservatives on the court said the president is right, that you cannot have this situation where these single judges can make these kind of rulings. So so that on one level, it's not that surprising because they are conservatives, and there has been a lot of opposition to this idea that a single judge can make a ruling that can apply across the country. On the other hand, it's complicated because it does potentially mean, in this particular case, Chloe, that birthright citizenship will now apply in some states where judges have ruled it unlawful. Will have ruled the Trump administration's attempts to overturn it unlawful, but birthright citizenship will presumably end in states where judges have not ruled it unlawful. So it's a very strange kind of hybrid situation. I think this will be cleared up. It's expected the Supreme Court will come to consider the case itself of birthright citizenship later in the year, when it's now finished its term for the year. It will start its new year term in October, and then it will come back to it then. But for the time being, the overall effect is that, yes, we will no longer have this situation where individual judges can make rules that apply to the entire country. But on the question of this specific question of birthright citizenship, there's a lot more litigation to go.
So, two questions that arise from what you've just said, because it's really interesting. Firstly, can this be challenged, or is this a final decision? And also, could we potentially see a situation where, for example, you mentioned California, a state like that says, actually, no, if you give birth here as an illegal citizen in the US, someone who's there illegally, you do get birthright citizenship. Could you see loads of people suddenly heading to California to give birth, for example?
Yeah, that's a possibility. So the first point, Supreme Court decision, it's the United States Supreme Court. No, there's no appeal to that. There's no change. That is the law. That can't be challenged. Yeah, but on the second point, yeah, we are going to have this curious patchwork, at least for a few months, and we'll see, again, how quickly the court does when it comes back and decides to rule on this. We are going to have this potentially this curious sort of hybrid, where, exactly as you say, California probably will. The court, indeed, one of the rulings has been in California, will essentially maintain birthright citizenship, so people there will be able to. Be US citizens if they just happen to be fortunate enough to be born there, but in other states it won't. So yeah, you could well see a kind of traffic people, people, women who are not US citizens and who are 8 months and 25 days pregnant, heading to California or other states where they will still get birthright. Their child will still get birthright citizenship, but in other states, they won't be able to have it.
Gerry, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.